approach to this is for us to think about what I take to be a given. That is, I think it's hard for us to do moral decision making right now in our culture. And I think that there are some really important reasons why that is. And I think that one of our tasks in thinking about ethics is to try to figure out what it is about making moral decisions that is so difficult. That is, that the project itself is a difficult project. So that's kind of the big theme that I've got. And then hopefully some of the things that we'll talk about will help to explain why it is that it's so difficult and help us figure out how we might be able to get around some of those difficulties and do as good a job as we can at making moral decisions. Always understanding that one of the things that's hard about moral decision making is that the best likelihood is that there might not be a specific right answer. It might be the case that there are some good answers, but it might not be the case that one of them is absolutely the right one. And it might not be the case that we can provide an adequate explanation of exactly what is the right one. So already we've got a hard task in front of us, because that means in situations where we have to act, we may not have the luxury of ever actually figuring out what is the absolutely right answer. And we might still have to act. That can be really, really hard for us. But it's what life is like. And really, ethics is about life. So even though we teach ethics under the framework of philosophy, and people are inclined often to think that philosophy is, just airhead stuff that doesn't really matter, I want to convince you that philosophy is as important as anything you can ever learn. Because philosophy is about living. And in particular, this branch of philosophy, ethics, is about living well. Not just flourishing, not just having the stuff that you want, but being able to do well so that when you get to the end of your life, you can look back on it and say, okay, it wasn't perfect. I didn't do everything perfectly. But overall, I did try hard to do my best. I tried hard to articulate what that would mean. I made some hard choices. And I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with what I did. That's what I want you to work for, is being able to say that. I'm satisfied with what I did. Okay, so I like to write on the board, so I'm going to write a lot of stuff on the board. It's just a thing. Okay, so moral decision making is difficult even if we have moral standards. So, okay, let me just ask, does anybody here have moral standards? Anybody? Anybody at all?
I think so.
Okay, yes, you should all be going like this. Yes, of course you do. Of course you have moral standards, right? Where did you get them?
Family.
Yeah, your family taught you, right? Where else? Experience. From experience, because experience sometimes teaches you that what your family taught you wasn't good enough. Right? Yeah, so experience, absolutely crucial. Where else do you get moral standards?
Friends.
From your friends, from peers. Where else?
Institutions, like some sort of, you could say like religious or anything like that.
Absolutely, from all of our institutions, right? Because all of our institutions have embedded value, right? They have embedded standards, and we are taught those. So from your educational institutions, religious institutions, institution of family, institution of this, institution of that. Oh, and guess what? Our economic institutions as well. That might be a problem. We'll think about it. Okay, so moral decision making hard, even if we have moral standards, which we do. We all have moral standards. And in fact, the best likelihood is that as a group in here, you share a lot of those moral standards. So even though your culture inclines you to think about yourself as a very, very unique individual, best likelihood is that you share a lot of your moral understanding and your moral standards with most of the other people in your groups, right? Does that make sense? That's why you can talk to other people in your groups about moral issues, and most of the time you understand each other, right? Even when you don't agree perfectly, most of the time you understand each other. And then there are those points at which we don't quite understand each other perfectly, or we really don't agree, and then we've got to figure out how to negotiate. Okay, so why is it so hard? I want to suggest that we have two main kinds of conflict. One is conflicts in understanding. And the other is conflicts in doing. Or acting. Okay? So we can have conflicts or difficulties in our ability to understand what the moral problem is. But we can also have conflicts in our ability to act once we have figured out what the moral problem is, and once we have figured out what we believe we ought to do, there may still be some problems in our ability to act. Okay, so at least those two kinds of problems in our moral work. So, in responding to the first one, what we do here is put our skills to work. So, I want to suggest that along with having moral standards, you also already have some moral skills, some moral abilities. Why would you already have moral abilities? Where would you get those? Not a trick question.
Experience.
From experience, absolutely. Because you have already practiced moral decision making, haven't you? Yes, Dr. Burchard, we have. Absolutely. Yeah, you have already practiced moral decision making. And in your moral decision making, you have put certain skills and abilities to work. Those are things, again, that you have learned throughout your development, throughout your upbringing, from all of those same sources that we talked about with regard to your standards. Right, so not only do you learn standards, you also learn some skills. Part of those skills are critical reasoning type skills, right? Because ethical reasoning is always a critical form of reasoning. That is, ethical reasoning is always about asking questions about arguments, about what the case is, about understanding, right? All kinds of things. So we need to take a critical approach, and we do not take for granted a surface story. We have to investigate deeper than that. We might come back to the surface story, but we have to investigate further than the surface. Okay? All right, so we're going to put moral skills to work. Well, what are some of these moral skills? Now, this is like a decision-making process, right? When we talk about these skills that we can put to work, one way to think about what this means is that we have a process that we can go through, a very generalized process that we can go through in figuring out how to make moral decisions or how to understand what we have to decide about. So generally, the first thing we do is gather information. Right? We need to gather information about the situation because we want to have the best possible understanding of all aspects of what we are going to have to make a decision about. Right? So we're going to put to work our information gathering skills, our research skills. Okay. Another skill that we're going to put to work is our ability to articulate values. Our ability to articulate values. That is, we need to articulate what values are at stake in this particular situation, or what values seem to be the ones that ought to guide us in this situation. So, when we have moral decisions to make, is it the case that the same values are always the ones at stake? No. No, because making moral decisions is a matter of understanding what this is about right here, right now. And it's not going to be the same as every other situation that we might find ourselves in. Might share similarities with some situations, but in general, what we're going to have to do is articulate a set of values that seem to be most salient in each situation that we have to respond to. So let's just take a little digression here and think for a minute about values. What kinds of things are we talking about when we say we need to articulate the values in the situation? So, what cases have you discussed most recently? What situations have you discussed? Alex?
There's been like issues of like fairness as well as like honesty.
Okay. And what case did those come up in?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a case where we just learned about there was a case, and it basically determined that some commerce law wasn't allowed because it would benefit the in-state economic entities as opposed to those who are out of state. And basically revised that law to be like, you can't do that because that's not fair.
Okay. So in that particular case, one of the things that seemed really important that was at stake was the idea of fairness. So fairness is a moral value, right? That is, it's a concept that expresses what matters. So when we try to articulate the values in any situation, what we're trying to do is express as clearly as we can what it is that matters in this situation. Okay, what matters? So fairness, honesty, what else might matter in a situation we have to decide about? What other values could we articulate? There's lots of them. Come on. You've been doing theory. I know you know a bunch of these things. Yeah. Equality. What else? Loyalty. Integrity. One of my favorites. You know why integrity is one of my favorites? Because nobody knows how to explain it. I love that we want to call on integrity, but most of the time we don't really know how to explain it. That's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, integrity. It's in almost every professional ethical code. act with integrity.
Can you explain it?
Can I explain it? Of course I can.
Well, yeah, that's why I asked.
That's my job. You want me to explain it right now?
Yeah.
Okay, here is an explanation of what integrity means. Now, here's the standard explanation when people really get pushed. The standard explanation of integrity is basically to always act with consistent values. That is, people think of integrity as, that Dr. Burchard, I can always count on her to act with honesty. I can always count on her to be fair. I can always count on her, right? So our idea about integrity is a kind of consistency in action, a kind of consistency grounded in our value set. Does that make sense? To the point that sometimes people say, if you ever choose to go against those values, you no longer have integrity. Right? Is what?
Seems a little steep.
It is a little steep, isn't it? Yeah. But you know what? Morality is steep, isn't it? Yeah, right. I mean, morality is one of the things that we have the highest standards for. So, yeah, it is. It is steep. And that's another thing that makes it hard, right? Because holding yourself to even your own moral standards can sometimes be very difficult. Because sometimes that commits you to things that are hard, right? So, just remember your Harry Potter. Professor Dumbledore. It's easy to do what's easy, but the right thing is almost never what's easy, is it? The right thing is almost always a hard thing. So if you're finding that it's easy, you probably need to think some more. Yeah, Dumbledore, wise man. We need more wizards. Okay, anybody want to throw out some more values? Get a couple more out here? I love values. I value values. That was funny.
Pride.
Pride?
Pride.
Pride. Is pride a moral value? Yeah, certainly we tend to value pride, don't we? But does it, I wonder if it helps us morally. Is that the kind of thing we're thinking about when we talk about values that will guide us in moral decision making? So one thing to think about here is that there are values of different types, aren't there? Pride might not be a moral value. It might not be a reliably moral value, right? Does that make sense? Because what does pride encourage us to do sometimes? Sometimes be biased, perhaps. If we have something at stake in our own pride, we might be tempted to see things in a biased way. What else does pride sometimes, how do we talk about pride? What's one of those big sayings about pride?
Swallow your pride.
Oh, swallow your pride.
Take pride in what you do.
Take pride in what you do. So now you are thinking about it as a moral value, aren't you?
I think so.
I think you are. I think you are working to articulate the idea of pride as something that supports us morally. And so if that's the way we mean it, then it could very well function as a moral value. What we'll have to do is be really careful about pride, because sometimes it doesn't function as a moral value, right? So sometimes we need to swallow our pride, right? What does that mean? Why do we need to swallow our pride sometimes?
I'd say admit you're wrong when you are.
Yeah, because sometimes we have to admit we're wrong. Oh, but maybe that's also supporting a moral understanding, right? If what we have to do is admit that we're wrong, then swallowing our pride is what allows us to do morally well, doesn't it? So maybe you've got something there. Yeah, good. So good for you for hanging on to it and working to think through it. That's exactly the project here, right? Working to articulate values in the situation that we're working with. Sometimes that's exactly what we will have to do. We will have to hold on to our idea of what matters morally in this situation and work to articulate it to somebody who at first doesn't really see it the way that we do. But sometimes we can make a good enough argument for it, can't we? Sometimes we can explain that. Sometimes we can't. Again, I'm inclined to say this one we need to be careful with, because pride can also lead us, I think, in less morally good directions. That is, pride can convince us that we're better than we are. And that's a worry, isn't it? Okay, got to work on the nodding. Yes. Yes, Dr. Burchard, it is. That's a worry. All right. So we're going to have to be able to articulate values. We also want to be able to use moral theories. To try to negotiate an understanding. We want to be able to put rules, values, obligations, principles, consequences, and loyalties into play in our situation. And attempt to provide reasons for prioritizing one or another over the rest. Does that make sense? Okay, so now you all have been learning theories, right? What are some of the theories you've been learning? Utilitarianism. It's a classic, isn't it? And what's our catchphrase for utilitarianism? What's our nutshell?
How would this affect, if everyone in society were to do this, how would it affect?
It's great is good, great is not.
Great is good.
Yeah, it's the greatest good, isn't it? That's our catchphrase. The one that you just said?
That was Kant's, right?
That's Kant, absolutely, yes. Okay, so we've also been learning Kantian theory, haven't we? Which is a version of deontology. That is, it's a duty-based theory, right? So utilitarianism is a consequence-based theory. It puts the emphasis on consequences. We got to look at the consequences to know whether something's right or not. Deontology puts the emphasis on our intentions or our rules. So we have to look at the rule that we're going to follow to know whether the action we're going to do is right or not. And one of the ways that we can nutshell that one is to think in terms of the idea of, what if everybody did this? If everybody acted the way I want to act right now, would that be a good rule? Yeah. Okay, so we need to be able to put moral theories to work. Now, what is helpful about moral theories?
Gives you kind of a guideline.
Yeah, they tend to function as some kind of guideline. Really, some of them do. The ones that work, especially on rules, those work really well as guidelines.
I mean, in this packet we got, it wasn't necessarily like a guideline, but it was just like this concept. I wish I could remember the term, but it was kind of, what if your action was like on the front, like the front line of a newspaper? Like, think about it in that respect. And so they expanded on it, but basically it's like maybe think of your actions as if they were all publicly known. And how do you feel about that?
There you go. Yeah, so some kind of rule of thumb. What if everybody was going to see what you do? That's a scary thought sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, because if everybody can see what you do, then you don't get to hide. From what? From what? What do we sometimes want to hide from? Consequences and
Reality.
judgment. Yeah, other people's judgment. Other people's sense of whether we're good or not. That can be real scary, can't it? Yeah, so that can really push us. And we need to be real careful about that one. Okay. Okay. Another skill that we need to put to work is deliberation. So what is deliberation?
Doing things intentionally.
Doing things intentionally is the outcome of deliberation. What is it that we're doing when we deliberate?
Maybe weighing options, scenarios in your head.
Playing out scenarios in our head, weighing options, right? When we are casting back and forth to try to figure out what possible scenario might be the one to go with, we're weighing the good versus the bad of it. We're weighing whether this rule seems like the right rule. We're weighing whether we believe that following this rule will actually give us a moral result. That's a reasoning process that puts things in contention with each other. And what we need to try to do is figure out where the balance is, right? So deliberation is one of those skills. And here's another one. We don't need just moral theories. We need moral intuition. Now, sometimes we talk about theories and intuitions as though they were in conflict with each other. And sometimes they can be. If it turns out to be the case that we have an intuition that is at odds with what we think is the best moral theory to go with in a case, then we're going to have to do some deliberation to try to figure out how to reconcile that problem, aren't we? But sometimes our moral intuitions act as a confirmation of our picture of, for instance, what values might be at stake or what theory to use. Does that make sense? So, we need to listen to our moral intuitions. Now, that doesn't mean that we will always follow our moral intuitions, because we have to check them. But we can check our moral intuitions by doing what? How do you check your moral intuitions?
You can talk to a group of people about it.
Exactly. Exactly. You talk to other people about it. You get a sense for what other people would say about the situation. Not just any people, though, right? Because it's going to have to be people you trust. Why do you need to trust the people that you're going to check your moral intuitions with?
They'll be honest with you.
Hopefully they will be honest with you. I mean, I assume if you trust them, that that's one of the reasons why you trust them, right? Yeah. Why else?
They have the same standards.
They might have the same standards as you, at least in a large in large part. But they might also have what?
Different standards?
They might have different standards or a different perspective or a different sense of how to prioritize the values in the case, right? That's what provides us with the check. Because we can ask other people, here's how I see this playing out. But does it make sense to you? Does my picture of it seem likely? Can you see things about this that I'm not seeing? Right? So we check with other people. We listen to our moral intuitions, but we check them against other people's intuitions and judgment. We also use, hopefully, our reflective skills to be honest, to help make sure that we are being honest with ourselves about, for instance, how often our intuition is actually good and how often our intuition tends to lead us wrong. Right? So does anybody have a friend who always goes with their gut feeling and tends to get it wrong? Anybody have that friend? Yeah. If you don't now, it's likely that you will at some point, because there are people for whom that intuition thing just doesn't seem to jibe well with a more objectively reasoned kind of a picture. And so some people's intuition just leads them wrong. Now, not necessarily about moral things, but think, for instance, about the friend that you have who always goes for the wrong kind of person in relationships. They just can't get it right. You know that friend? Hopefully you're not that friend, because that's unfortunate. If you are that friend, you might want to start working on not listening to your intuition all the time. But that's what those reflective skills are about, right? Our ability to step back and look at our own actions, our own behavior, our own circumstances and say, you know, I tend to get this wrong. So maybe I shouldn't be the one who is making the judgment here. Maybe I should actually learn to rely on somebody else's judgment until I start to learn a different pattern of thinking about these things, or a different pattern of feeling these things if it's my intuition that's a problem. Does that make sense? Okay, I want to call all these things moral skills. And I want to suggest that you all have developed some level of these moral skills at this point in your lives. Right? And I want to suggest that the development of these skills is an ongoing, lifelong task. That is, you are never going to hit a point where you are done with this work, because we can always get better at it. And if we keep working at it, we probably will get better at it. So that as we grow older, as we gain more experience, as we gain maturity, as we go through more kinds of moral situations and see how they play out, we should learn some things that will help us become better at these moral skills. But it's a lifelong project. So don't worry about it if you think you've still got work to do. Of course you do, because we just do. It's something we can always learn more about. Right, so I have been teaching ethics for years, and I find that I am always able to learn something new. And I can learn new things from other people. And I don't mean other professional ethicists. Yeah, I can learn things from them. But I also can learn things from ordinary people in my life. I learn things from my children. Sometimes scary things, granted. I learn things from students and from interactions that I have with students in classes. Because any person can have a perspective that is not the same as mine, but that helps me see something about what I could improve on. Does that make sense? Yeah, so when I say it's a lifelong project, I don't just mean for you. I really mean it's a lifelong project for me. So, got to keep working at it. All right, so we need skills. And these skills are going to help us with conflicts in understanding, because these are the things that are going to help us put a framework of understanding around the problem. These are things that are going to help us pull out the details of any moral situation, put them in relief so that we can see what they are and we can see how we need to respond to them. Right? So these are skills that will help us in our understanding. And the better our understanding is, the less conflict, hopefully, we will find in our moral work. Okay, but we still have this interesting problem, conflicts in doing or acting. So we need to think about what this is about. This is where I want to say we need some different kinds of abilities. Oh, sorry, can't write. Okay. With regard to conflicts in doing well, we need a number of different kinds of things. Primarily, what we need is something like moral imagination or imaginative empathy, and we need character. We need a developed character, a reliable sense of self. Okay, what do we need these things for? Well, the moral imagination and imaginative empathy we need for perspective work. That is, one of our primary tasks in making moral choices is our ability to take a perspective that is not our own. That is, it's our ability to see the situation in different ways. Not just the way that is most obvious to us. In particular, what we want to be able to do is to see through the lives and experiences of other people, as well as ourselves. Does that make sense? To see through someone else's life. To see what it's like to be affected by this moral problem if we are a completely different person. To put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, right? That's the standard way of thinking about it. Or we could talk about it as seeing through someone else's eyes. That's a very interesting way to talk about perspective taking. Because one of the things that allows us is to see ourselves from someone else's position. And that can be an amazing lesson. Not always a feel-good lesson, but it can be incredibly valuable for our learning, right? So, learning to see through somebody else's eyes is an exercise in imagination. Because we are not that person. And we don't know for sure what it's like to be them, do we? No, Dr. Burchard, we don't. We don't know exactly what it's like to be somebody else, do we? And perhaps especially with regard to kind of some of the big issues of difference in people's lives. So, for instance, if I'm a person of privilege, it can be very, very difficult for me to see a situation through the eyes of someone who is radically less privileged than I am. Right? So one of the things we have to know about ourselves, right, and this goes back to our reflective skills, we need to know what our privileges are. In what ways are we privileged? In what way are you all privileged here?
Education.
In terms of your education. Education is an enormous privilege. And even if you are working to put yourself through school, your ability to be here is still a marker of privilege. It puts you in a completely different position than people who are not going to have this kind of education. Right? It makes it can make a big, big difference in your life. Okay, so being able to see your own privilege and then being able to do the work of imagining what it must be like to be in this situation and not have that privilege. That's an important piece of work. Why is that so important? Why should we care?
Helps you understand decisions
It's going to help us understand decisions, our decisions,
and others.
and the decisions of others. But it's also going to help us understand what?
Other points of view, other perspectives.
Other points of view. And what do we get from other points of view?
I mean, knowledge, you get kind of a better understanding.
Ethical clarity,
Ethical what?
clarity,
Clarity?
clear understanding of ethics and morals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to another piece of perspective work. We need to put things in perspective. So one piece of perspective work is to take perspectives of others. But another piece of perspective work is to put things in perspective. Like, for instance, our own self-interest, our own goals, our own needs, our own desires. Oh, how come this is all about me all of a sudden? How come it's about me?
From your perspective.
Because it's from my perspective, exactly. And from my perspective, guess what? I am the center of the universe. Everything revolves around me. Right? Yes, you can admit it. in a certain way, from our perspective, the world is about me. And that's what's going to come first. So what I'm going to have to do is actually work to put my picture of things into perspective. I'm going to have to work to look at what other people's needs are in this situation, what other people's self-interest is, what other people's goals are, what other people's values are. Because I can't make a fair decision simply based on me. Right? Yeah. If I'm going to make a decision that will affect the lives of other people, I have to be able to treat those people as though they matter just as much as I matter. Right? Whose basic principle is that? That would be, what theory do we get that from? What version of the categorical imperative is that? What? What? Have we forgotten the categorical imperatives already? Act such that you treat humanity, both in self and others, always as an end and never merely as a means. The principle of respect in Kantian theory. That is probably the best thing we get from Kant. The absolutely best thing. It's a wonderfully clear articulation of the idea of respect for persons. What does it mean to respect other persons? Treat them like they matter as much as you think you matter. Does that make sense? Treat them as an end in themselves, never as just a means for you to use. I can't do that if I don't know how to put myself and my goals and my needs and my desires into proper perspective with the needs of everybody who's going to be affected by this situation. Right? I have to be able to put everybody's needs into perspective. One of the things that that means is it is more than likely that I will discover that my needs are not the ones that matter most. And I have to be able to accept that. Does that make sense? I have to be able to set aside my needs right here when they're not the ones that matter the most. That is putting me in perspective. Putting my stuff in perspective, right? Hugely important task. Okay, what else do we need to do? Oh, we need to use this imagination thing to picture what solutions might be best. This is an imaginative effort, right? Because presumably, when we've got a moral decision to make, we don't have the decision in front of us. It's up to us to figure out what that decision ought to be. So, we need enough imaginative ability to be able to do this perspective work, but also to be able to imagine what might be a good way to resolve this problem. Again, realizing that there may very well be more than one good way to resolve this problem. Right? Again, this is a task for imagination. So we need a good, well-developed moral imagination. We need to practice imagining what would be best. But here's an interesting problem. What does it mean to say best? Well, we have at least two possible answers, and they are suggested by different requirements of our world. On the one hand, we have a moral best. And the moral best is going to be cashed out in terms of excellence. The moral best, the idea of what is best morally, is going to be cashed out, it's going to be articulated, expressed in terms of what would be excellent in this situation. That's a moral concept, right? And it encompasses ideas like what would allow people involved in this situation to flourish? What would allow people involved in this situation to see themselves as doing well? Not materially, but in terms of their sense of who they are. In terms of their sense of respect for themselves. In terms of their sense of the obligations they owe to others around them. Right? The other idea about best is a material best. And this one we cash out in terms of the notion of efficiency. Now, this is one that's going to come up for you all a lot if you go into business careers, right? Because there's always going to be pressure to be efficient. This is a term that is going to really slide into the discourse, and in particular, it's going to slide into our discourse about what is best, so that if we aren't paying attention, it will simply become assumed that when we talk about best in any decision-making situation, we might mean efficient, most efficient. And sometimes most efficient means most profitable, doesn't it? Yes, Dr. Burchard, it does. But efficiency is not a moral term at all in the same way that excellence is. So one of the things that we need to think about is always, when we're talking about best, when we're talking about imagining what is the best solution to our problem, what kind of best do we mean? Is it possible that the most efficient best can also be excellent enough to qualify as a good moral answer? It is possible. There's no reason to assume that it can't be done. But if we are only thinking in terms of efficiency, then we're not doing the moral work. Okay? The other thing about best is that we always need to be thinking in terms of, when we talk about a best solution, best for whom? Or best for what goal? right? So when we talk about an answer to a moral problem being the best answer, do we mean it's the best for the company? Do we mean it's the best for the community that the company's located in? Do we mean it's the best for the CEOs? Do we mean it's the best for the workers? Do we mean it's best for workers' families? Whom are we talking about? And what goal do we have in mind when we are talking about what is best? Do we mean it's best for the company's bottom line? The profit line? Do we mean what's best for the company's long-term interests? Right? So when we talk about best solutions, we always need to be articulating as clearly as we can what that best means, so that we won't trip ourselves up by going for a best that's not really best. Does that make sense? All right. And we can always throw that other language in, right? We can always throw in the language of excellence and efficiency to help test our understanding of what it is that we've got going. Sometimes that can really help. Vocabulary is really helpful sometimes. Okay, let's see, what else do we need to do? So thinking about this imaginative stuff and picturing solutions, we could talk about it in another way. We can talk about telling a moral story. Because sometimes telling a story is much clearer and easier to do than a theoretical analysis. Does that make sense? Sometimes it makes sense for us to work it out in terms of a story, but there are some constraints on the kind of story we want to tell here. That is, it has to be a coherent story. That is, all the pieces of it have to fit together. It can't be disjointed and having stuff clear over there that doesn't fit with this stuff over here. It has to be a story that works together as a whole. It has to be a consistent story. So we can't start off our story by saying, this is a moral story about fairness, and have it simply slide in the storytelling to become a moral story about pride. Right? It has to be a consistent story. It has to be an intelligible story. That is, it has to be a story that actually makes sense of all of its components. It has to be a story that makes sense of what the problem is, how the problem has come about, who is being affected by the problem, or who will be affected by the problem, who will be affected by the solutions we're proposing. How we can explain to ourselves and to others what matters in this story, right? Because we have to be able to do that. So it has to be a story of intelligibility that hooks everything together and that still makes sense, both to us and to the audience that we're telling it to, right? So again, that's a way that we can kind of check our understanding of things, is by working it out in terms of a story. We can ask ourselves basic questions like, what is it that's going on here? What matters in this issue? To whom does it matter? Why does it matter? How did this problem come about? Who am I And what's my place in this story? Why am I telling the story and not somebody else? How can I and others make sense out of this situation and possible responses? Why do we hold the values that we hold? Right? All those kinds of questions can help us put together a coherent, consistent, intelligible story. And sometimes that will explain things better than a theoretical analysis will do. Okay, we also then, finally, we have to choose. That's what everything is being directed at, right? We have to choose what is good on the basis of all the work that we have done. We have to choose what is best, or what we think is best, or what we can manage as best. Again, recognizing honestly what version of best we're talking about. But our moral work is not going to be done until we choose and implement our choice. Even if we are afraid that the answer we've chosen might not be the right one. Sometimes we will have to choose even in those situations where we don't know. We don't feel secure, but a choice has to be made. Okay? All right. Facing these conflicts, the difficulty of moral decision making requires even more than just skills and tools. It requires development of ourselves, development of changes in ourselves. It requires the development of character, right? It requires us to develop a reliable ability to act in ways that we believe are good. That's basically what character means. So, in order for us to have that kind of character, we're going to have to do a number of things. One of them, so this is about character. We have to moderate desires. We have to learn how to moderate our desires so that more important objectives can be fulfilled. That is more important than what we desire. Another way to think about this is that we need to learn how to feel enough. Feel like, okay, it's enough. I can be done here. I don't have to have more. I'm okay with this level. I don't have to have more money. Has anybody seen the latest Michael Moore movie, Where to Invade Next? And he talks with the CEOs of an Italian company. And he says, so you all are providing your employees with, basically 8 weeks of paid vacation a year. Everybody gets to take a 2-hour lunch so they can go home, be with their families, and relax. Don't you realize that if you didn't give your employees all this much, that you could have more profit? And they said, why do we need to be richer? We have everything we want. So why would we penny pinch everything we can get from our employees rather than having all of them have a better life too. What they said was, enough. This is enough. We don't have to do more. We all need to learn how to do that. And I think it's really hard in our culture, because our culture pushes more and more and more and more at us all the time, right? In all kinds of ways. But it's the biggest, marketing campaign out there. More, 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 more. Buy more, get more, be more. Jeez. I'm good, okay? I'm good. I don't need more. Well, maybe a few things. But it's really hard to resist that in our culture, isn't it? That does make moral decision making harder. Okay, so we need to work on moderating our desires. We need to develop reliability. That is, we need to become reliable about a whole bunch of things. We need to become people that other people can rely on. We need to become predictable in certain ways. Do people expect you to tell the truth? That's a kind of reliability. If they don't, you should think about why that is and whether that's okay. Do people expect you to pay them back if you borrow money? If they don't, what's going to happen?
Feel like you stop lending you money.
They'll stop lending you money if they're smart, right? You need to develop reliability. So this is, in a way, we could talk about this as integrity, couldn't we? Develop integrity. Be reliable. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And if it turns out that you can't or you don't, face up to it. Don't make excuses. Say honestly, I did not do this, and I'm sorry. Right? Take responsibility. Okay. And we need to develop, in particular, a reliable, impulse to do right. Or at least what we believe conscientiously to be right. Right? People should be able to say about us, I don't always agree with Dr. Burchard, but I know she will do what she believes is right. People should be able to say that about us. And we want to be able to say that about other people too, don't we? Yes, Dr. Burchard, we do. It would be a better world. Okay. All right. In particular, in business issues, I think we are likely to have conflicts in doing and acting. I don't think the issue so often is understanding. We have a lot of tools to bring to our understanding. I think that where we are likely to have more difficulty is in terms of our ability to choose what we believe is right and to act on it. And again, that's because we feel pressures against those choices, right? If my belief in what is right does not jibe with what my corporation's picture is of what to do in this situation, then I am going to find it much more difficult to choose what I believe to do, to be right. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about something a little different. So everybody seen the new Star Wars movie? Not everybody. Who's seen the new Star Wars movie? Hands up, come on. Where's my Star Wars geeks? People, it's a whole new generation of Star Wars. We can reactivate all the Star Wars tropes at this point. Everything can get pulled back into popular culture. This is great. This is what we want. Okay, so you know that Star Wars is one big extended moral story, right? It's great, isn't it? Big moral story about a moral universe. That's our goal, the moral universe. That's fantastic. Okay, so what do we need to do? Use the Force. Okay, what's the moral force? What's the Force in Star Wars? Geeks?
It's an entity that controls everything in our lives, and
Affects everything in our lives. Doesn't control, because we can act against it, right?
yeah, but it also kind of like happens anyway, sort of.
Yeah, so it is independent of us. It's a real thing. It affects us. And, what?
That like it binds us, it connects us, that's like his quote from,
That's right.
yeah.
It binds and connects us. Is that good? Do we want to be connected? Yes, Dr. Burchard, we do. We do want to be connected. Why is that? Because why? What happens to you if you're isolated?
Get lonely.
You get lonely. That's not helpful. And what's even worse than that?
You don't have a sense of security.
You have no sense of security. You have no sense of self, right? We are interdependent creatures. We need others. We want others. We want to share lives, right? This appears to be a pretty basic fact about humans. We want to share lives. Okay, one of our biggest tools for sharing lives is emotion. We need well-developed moral emotions. Now, another term for emotions is sentiment. A rather old-fashioned term. And one of the biggest names in the development of the idea of moral sentiments is somebody whose name you're familiar with. Adam Smith. What do you know from Adam Smith? What's that one line you know?
Laissez-faire. The laissez-faire.
The laissez-faire. And how does he talk about that? He didn't say laissez-faire. That's a later term. How did he talk about it?
Guiding hand.
The invisible hand of the market. The invisible hand of the market. What does that mean? We associate it with laissez-faire capitalism, and it's supposed to mean what?
markets will guide
It'll,
themselves.
yeah.
The market will guide us and everything will come out great. It'll be great, won't it? If we just let the market do its thing, everything will be great. Okay, I want to tell you that that is not a particularly good understanding of what Adam Smith actually said. It's a line that is taken out of context. It's not well developed. And Smith's big work was a book called Theory of Moral Sentiment. That is, theory of moral feelings. What Smith's big project was an articulation of the important moral feelings and how the moral feelings are what we need to guide us, not an invisible hand. Okay? So what Smith says is that there are two primary moral sentiments. One is sympathy and one is resentment. Sympathy, very much like what we were talking about over here, the idea of perspective taking. What Smith says is, it is natural for us to want to take the perspective of other people because we want to be in sympathy with them. We want to be able to approve of other people's actions and choices. And we want them to approve of us, right? This is about the way in which we are interconnected. Sympathy, or if we learn how to be in sympathy with others, how to respond sympathetically, we will be able to act kindly, generously, patiently, compassionately, right? We will be able to act in ways that further community, that build relationships among us. So sympathy is the positive emotion that we want to develop. We want to learn how to be sympathetic with others. Resentment is the negative feeling we need to learn. Because what resentment is an emotion of moral evaluation. Resentment is what we feel when we think someone has done wrong. We would probably talk today about something more like indignation, maybe. But Smith's idea was that we have, again, a natural emotive response to wrongdoing. When we see things going wrongly, we don't like it. We want to act to stop it. That's what resentment is there for. It's to help us see when we need to work to stop something that's happening. On our behalf, but also on the behalf of others. And we want other people also to feel resentment for wrongs done to us, right? So again, we need emotions that we can share with others that will help us understand how to act well. So that's one approach to emotion in ethics. The other one is the ethics of care. The idea in the ethics of care is that, again, we are interdependent social beings who need and want to be in connection with others. So that when we come in contact with people who have needs, our first response should be to think about how we could help. It's about meeting needs. So notice that this approach to morality is much less evaluative than lots of other approaches. It's not so much about right and wrong. It's about recognizing what needs people have and thinking about how we can act to relieve those needs. Now, in order to do that, we have to develop so the version of this that I'm thinking of most strongly is the version by a philosopher named Nell Noddings, who is a philosopher of education at Stanford University, one of the early developers of this theory. What Noddings says is we all have a kind of automatic response of care for people with whom we are already in close relations, right? So, for instance, for your friends, you tend to have an automatic response of caring for your friends, right? If your friends are in trouble, you tend to care. And you tend to show that caring by wanting to act to relieve the problem, right? Okay, so we have this sort of model of what it means to care for others that we can use to create a picture for ourselves. And this is where imagination comes into play, of our ideal caring self. My ideal caring self is my picture of what I'm like when I am in a caring relationship and I am responding well to the needs that someone is presenting me. The model, the paradigm that Noddings uses for this is the mother-child relationship, because she thinks it's one of the deepest caring relationships that we can be involved in. I think there are lots of other deep caring relationships that we could use as a model. Again, a good, deep friendship, I think, provides us with a really good model. And it's better in some ways because it's more equal. But what we can do is think of a particular instance when we believe we have really done a good job of caring for somebody. What was that like? And what did it feel like? Right? That can serve as a model for us for situations in which we are presented with a need from someone that we don't have a deep relationship with. Right? Does that make sense? So if my partner comes to me with a need, it's easy for me to care most days. Right? I want to relieve my partner's difficulty. I want to make things work for my partner, or for my kid, or for my friends. I want to care for them. It's not something I have to work at. But when somebody that I don't know well comes to me with a need, I might not get that automatic response. But I still have an obligation to respond to the need that is presented to me, insofar as I am able, right? So what I can do is call up my ideal picture of myself when I'm caring well, and ask myself a simple question. What would I do if this were my partner? How would I care for this person if this person were someone that I love, someone whose pain I want to relieve unproblematically? And that can help me imagine what kind of steps I could take to relieve the need that is present to me in a caring way. Does that make sense? It's kind of a simple idea, right? That we care for people all the time, but that this could be a model of moral behavior. That we could think about morality in terms of meeting needs and think of ourselves as moral agents in terms of how we act to meet the needs of others. Does that make sense? Okay. Again, sometimes this is a more effective way of thinking about a resolution for a moral problem. And one of the reasons it is effective is that it invokes the moral imagination immediately. It immediately puts us in the position of thinking imaginatively about what can be done in this situation. But it also is very concrete, because it's not just imagine any old thing, it's what would help this person right now that is something I can do, right? Not something someone else will have to do, unless I actually am going to speak to that person and try to bring them in on it. But what can I do to meet a need right here, right now? And the value of that is that it helps maintain and build relationships. And all things considered, the best likelihood is that relationships are more important to us than anything else is. Our lives are built out of relationships. Our sense of self is built out of our relationships. We will not be who we are without the relationships we have. Now, it is the case that sometimes the relationships that we have, or the relationships we are called on to meet needs in, will in fact be relationships that are harmful. That is a possibility. Part of our moral responsibility as agents of caring is to make sure that we don't get sucked in to caring in ways that are harmful for us or harmful for the person we're caring for, right? So, think about what kids ask for. Kids will ask for, all the candy they can eat. It's not a good idea. So, we don't show care for our children by just handing them all the candy they want. We say no. So the ethics of care actually puts us in the position of recognizing that sometimes the way to care for someone is absolutely to not give them what they want, but rather to think in terms of what they need. Again, to the best of our ability, and to respond to needs to the best of our ability. Okay, I could go on, obviously, for hours more, but I think we only have about 5 minutes left. Okay, so I want to give you a chance to ask questions about anything that I've either said or we've talked about or that we haven't. And I will do my best to answer. Oh, okay, I did such a great job. Oh, no, you can ask them.
I got you one.
All right, all right.
So coming over here to this side, the
Yeah.
doing and acting, you have written there, picture the solution that might be best. I was wondering, strategy for doing that, could you possibly work backwards, or are there too many uncertainties because it generally involves other people? But could you work backwards from this vision that you have that works best for whatever best is to you, and make your decision based on how you think you could achieve that outcome?
Yeah, sure.
You think that's possible?
I sure do. Yeah, sometimes that's a great approach. Imagine the goal. What steps would it take to get there? Yeah. Mhm. On the other hand, one of the things that's really difficult about moral decision making is that we're almost never going to be certain. We may never feel like we have all the information we need to make the best decision. We may simply not be able to do it with certainty. But the thing is that certainty is not the way the world is. So what we need to do is learn how to make decisions in that uncertainty, recognizing that it is a feature of life. And recognizing that it means we will not always make decisions that we end up thinking are best. We'll get it wrong sometimes. And then what we really have to be able to do is admit it, right? And that's hard too. But we have to learn to admit that we are wrong and to say, I'm sorry, and to make amends, right? That is part of what it means to be a moral being. It means we're not always going to get it right, and that we will have to say, I'm sorry, and we will have to make reparations. That's part of being moral. It's a huge piece, and a difficult piece, one that none of us like. Anything else? You'll probably think of questions as you mull over stuff and, ask Dr. Harvey, and she can always ask me. I'd be happy to help with anything that turns out to be thorny. But basically, you all have a lot of moral skills and abilities already. And your work is to learn more, develop more, become as good a moral agent as you can. That's your life project. Yeah?
I just wanted to ask you about self-identity and relationships.
Uh-huh.
So what if you're naturally shy or reclusive and don't pull in a lot of people? Does that, you wouldn't want to go out of your way to make friends, but because that could cause social anxiety.
Mhm.
So how would you develop a true self-identity without many relationships?
I'm not sure why we wouldn't be able to develop a true self-identity with a minimal number of relationships.
Okay,
It
so
would be a different identity, but I don't see what would be wrong about it,
okay.
right? Yeah, we would be moral agents within that scope, right? That's where we would practice our moral work. The thing that'll be hard about that is that it's almost inevitable that you're going to get pulled into a bigger sphere.
Mhm.
And if you don't have practice working in that bigger sphere, that'll be hard.
So practice that.
Practice.
Okay.
Yeah, real practice, practice it.
Yeah, just real quick, you talked about the main problems in business being the conflicts in doing. Maybe just kind of expand on that a little bit, as opposed to conflicts and understanding, is that kind of leaning more towards these or whatever company or whatever it is, they kind of know enough about what they're doing. They just don't know which decision will apply best to that, or is
No, so I'm thinking something a little more blunt than that and maybe cynical. So my picture of it is that businesses don't have any problem figuring out what's the right thing to do. They just don't want to do it. We just don't always want to do the right thing.
Like the Wells Fargo example, they all knew that was absolutely wrong.
Yeah. But there are sometimes other kinds of benefits to doing wrong, right? And there are pressures on us to act against our moral best understanding sometimes. So that's what I think the conflict in doing is. It's about all kinds of temptations and pressures that will push us in a different direction.
You know, we talk about how emphasis on short-term goals is
Yeah.
the number one
Uh-huh.
reason leading to unethical decisions, and that
Yeah.
would be that they know what the right thing to do
Yeah.
is. But
Yep.
to achieve those short-term goals, do the wrong thing.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. I really appreciate your participation, and I hope it'll go well for you for the rest of the semester.